Humanity has long since left the confines of Earth. They have now taken to the stars and have established numerous kingdoms in space, ruled by countless governments, ideologies, corporations, collectives, and other special interest groups. All of them make use of a specific kind of biotechnology, artificial humans, robots of muscle, bone and blood, wired with steel and pre-programmed brains possessing minimal thought as long as they were properly maintained. Wrangled by distant voices and uncaring overlords, they are used for disposable work, where using normal humans would be too dangerous or too expensive. These artificial humans are known universally as proxies. The Proxy. Written and illustrated by Pierre Grange. Narrated by 11 Labs. Chapter 1. Overworking the Forge. Peter Callahan was under an astounding amount of stress. His laboratory was a complete shambles, looking more like a hoarder's nest rather than a state-of-the-art biolab. Every completed task on his list seemingly added 10 new problems to address. Even the lighting was busted, and the beleaguered bioengineer didn't even spare a thought to call a custodian to fix it. He had gone for more than 2 days with no sleep, and his consumption of neurostims was starting to make his hands shake and his bowels tighten. Intelligence Office 372, on the 823rd floor of the main administration building of Universal Consumer Holdings, was not in a good place. Especially, Peter thought, considering how vital the office had been for the company in the last couple of months, with the Bedford estate and other competitors making waves like they have. He opened one of his desk drawers, fishing out an unused neurostim hypo amidst the swamp of depleted ones. Pressing it to his neck, he clicked the trigger. A hiss, a sensation like a mosquito bite, followed by muscle tension in the neck. And finally, in a few seconds, he had focus and clarity, at least for a few hours. They were definitely not paying him enough for this nonsense, he thought. He straightened his tie and proceeded to the next task, checking her memory. He grabbed his datapad and began scrolling through pages upon pages of brain data. Amidst the computers, science equipment, filing cabinets, and other miscellaneous pieces of technology, in the center stood the core of the whole operation this office and Peter had been dedicated toward. A large plexiglass tube ringed with metal and machinery, pipes snaking into the floor and ceiling like the roots of a mangrove tree, filled with a strange viscous material, serving as an amniotic control for the prize inside, a female proxy. Her serial number was UCHXK 4409-9817-8823-66. Her name was whatever the operation manager decided it was for the particular mission she would be sent out on, for she was a Claudius-class intelligence operative proxy. But for the ease of everyone in Yukshin Strand, she was simply referred to as Unit 66. One of the best, in fact, within UCH's division on the planet of Strand, expertly designed and maintained by Peter Callahan, while his peers seemed only interested in adding military cyberware and protocols. As long as they had the word stealth in the description, he actually took into consideration someone who could work in corporate espionage, although being invisible and able to rip bulkheads with one's bare hands sounds impressive in a pitch meeting. At the end of the day, the best means of accessing a company's secrets was flattery, innuendo, greasing palms, veiled threats, extortion, and of course, the old-fashioned method of simply looking like you belonged in the place you were infiltrating. Peter could amuse himself for a while by going through case files of UCH being successfully infiltrated by an amateur thief or labor proxy that had simply donned an expensive suit and convincing fake lanyard. That is where his proxy shined. Sure, she had combat training installed, along with other military conditioning, but she was ultimately designed to use diplomacy and genuine sneakiness to achieve what her handlers wanted. While other operatives on his office floor had a success rate between 50% to 80%, his had performed each objective perfectly. And like any good corporate resource that was a confirmed moneymaker, she was worked to the point of depletion. Peter's proxy had been active for about 2 years. In that time, she had been deployed in more than 300 sorties, both on Strand and off-world. Most of her kind had less than 1/10 of that amount of engagements over the same period. And now, Peter was paying the price for his employer's demands.
Damn it,
he cursed. It was so typical of mega-corporations, and the bigger they were, the worse it was. If there was someone doing their job right, they were either promoted to the point of incompetence, or they were wrung and drained as much as possible, like he was now. Proxies required careful maintenance, and the more complex the work a proxy did, the more time was needed to recalibrate them between tasks. Due to overwork in an extremely technical role, Peter's proxy was now severely behind in terms of maintenance and recalibration. She seemed so peaceful, hovering in that tank, her breathing and heart rate stable. But Peter's datapad showed the truth: extreme levels of brain activity. Memories that hadn't been wiped were now being subconsciously scrutinized by a brain that was desperately reaching a threshold where it could snap and start thinking like a living organism, rather than just a very smart piece of equipment. If the human brain excelled at one thing, it was its ability to fill in gaps of information, and his proxy was in real danger of filling those gaps. Peter wiped his forehead. The neurostims made the obvious clear to his stress-addled mind. His proxy would need a significant amount of time to recalibrate. No sooner had he begun to mentally draft her recalibration, an obnoxious stream of light entered his laboratory, accompanied by the hard-stepping noise of expensive shoes echoing in the dark, humming room.
"Mr. Callahan,"
the man said. He was a swarthy man, dressed impeccably, as is typical of an upper management stooge. His expression was grim and humorless, and he kept his hands behind his back when facing Peter. If he had any feelings about the mess that was his employee's office, then he did nothing to express it.
Mr. Daeril.
Peter made an impotent attempt to make himself presentable, involving little more than a quick brushing of his shirt and pant legs. He would be apprehensive and anxious if not for his concerns about his proxy.
"I was hoping to speak to you, but if you are too busy..."
No, not at all, sir. I've been meaning to talk to you about certain concerns that I have.
"The state of your biolab is your concern, Mr. Callahan,"
Peter's boss said acidly.
Oh, it's not about my office, though its state is due to the concerns that I have.
Daeril's eyebrow raised.
"Well, regardless. Unfortunately, I must ask that you put these concerns aside for the time being. We've just got priority message from headquarters. They have an operation that needs to be completed, and they have assigned Unit 66 to complete it."
Peter's face paled. No! They can't demand this of his proxy again.
I am sorry, sir,
Peter said, unused to the feeling of bravery. Daeril was taken aback, though remained unflappable.
"I beg your pardon."
I am sorry, sir, but Unit 66 is not fit for redeployment.
Daeril walked over to Peter's office chair and sat slowly, making as much as a performance as possible.
"It has been a full day since its last deployment. Proxies need only 8 hours to recalibrate."
Peter huffed at Daeril's ignorance, desperately trying to hide his annoyance.
Most proxies only need 8 hours because they only do basic repetitive tasks. Unit 66 is not a miner or laborer. She is an intelligence operative. She receives more instruction, mnemonic training and conditioning in a single deployment, what normal proxies receive throughout their entire lifetimes.
Daeril sat there, his eyes darting. His subordinate had provided information that had slipped his mind. How could it? He was certain that this was mentioned when he got the job a few years back. How could he have missed it? No. It was Peter, Unit 66's wrangler, who was wrong. He had kept quiet. He didn't mention anything to him when there was clearly a problem. Frank Daeril never made a mistake. He had sold himself to the board with that statement.
"How much does Unit 66 need to be recalibrated?"
he asked.
Under normal circumstances, Unit 66, as well as any other intelligence operative proxy, would need at least a week.
Peter answered. Daeril buried his face in his palms in a rare display of weakness. He breathed deeply and regained his composure.
"She needs to be ready in 3 days."
Peter's eyes widened.
"Can we recalibrate it in that time? Is there a form of minimal calibration that we can use?"
I am sorry, but no, sir. We have already expended those options. Even if there were, recalibration is a rubber band. The more it is delayed, the more time is needed for the next recalibration.
Why didn't you mention any of this?
Daeril roared.
Why are you only mentioning this right now?
I did mention it.
Peter responded meekly.
I had mentioned it many times. In mail, in meetings, in company bulletins, everywhere I could, and with every channel I had at my disposal. And yet I was either ignored or told to keep quiet due to UCH's discretion policy for intelligence officers.
Daeril slowly stood up, his mnemonic training in leadership snapping like a whip crack. He glared at the woman in the glass tank, scrutinizing her for some sign of weakness or sickness, something that would match the weak, wretched creature that Callahan was describing. Her performance had been exemplary. There were no others that could be trusted, no one else to make his work look good in the eyes of the higher-ups. He needed to explore the options they had.
If we were to start recalibrating today, how long would it be before she would be ready for deployment?
Peter tapped on his datapad, double-checking the numbers, and to assure himself that any promise he would make would be one he could follow up on.
At least 4 weeks. Even if we flushed her and synthesized a new proxy, it would still take the same amount of time.
Daeril sighed through his nose, his eyes set on the woman in the tank.
Describe the worst-case scenario to me, please.
Worst case is that the brain suffers a series of aneurysms in sorting itself as it effectively undergoes 2 decades worth of psychological development in the span of a few minutes. It can lead to something as small as a stroke to the point that the brain is literally pulped. However, more likely is what we call a epiphany.
Daeril's eyes broke contact with the proxy in the tank, his gaze boring into Peter.
And what is that?
An epiphany is the most common result with proxies who are repeatedly redeployed without proper recalibration. Essentially, it is as it sounds. The proxy brain is basically the same as a normal human brain. And like the human brain, it is evolved to expertly extrapolate context and missing information based on incomplete and fragmented data. Hunters trying to find prey with animal tracks and broken foliage, for example.
Peter continued.
So when there is a lot of information in a proxy's brain that is left to sit in there over multiple sleep and awake cycles, the proxy's brain, by habit and instinct, begins to try to make what it can out of the information. It creates neural pathways outside of the proxy overseer's direct control, meaning that the proxy is now self-aware and has conscious control over the information in their head. They essentially become alive.
An uncomfortable silence permeated between the 2 men and the tank.
How often does this happen?
Daeril asked.
Not often.
Peter answered casually.
Only when the proxy is not properly maintained and calibrated. Last year, Logan's Pass only had 3 epiphanies, and that is in a population of millions of active proxies.
What happens if an epiphany occurs?
Daeril could not help but feel foolish for asking. Someone who works with proxies should know this, but he hadn't gotten anywhere doing the jobs he was supposed to be managing.
We activate the insurance,
Peter said.
Every proxy is designed to include an ocular flashbang installed behind each of their eyes. It kills them instantly and painlessly, and liquefies their brains so no information or data can be pulled from them.
How humane,
Daeril said dryly.
What are the odds of Unit 66 having an epiphany?
If we deploy her now, as is, there is a 20% chance.
So even at its worst, she will perform as the best of the others.
I like those odds, Daeril thought. It wasn't ideal, but it was still better than nothing.
Can we improve that in any way? Reduce the risk?
Peter started pacing, scratching the back of his neck. He pondered as he bit his lip.
We can give her a heavy dose of propranolol and some new beta blockers I've gotten from R&D. They potentially be able to delay epiphanies, but it isn't foolproof or even reliable. But it is best suggestion I can give on short notice.
Then do it. She needs to be conscious, dressed and walking in 3 days. Preferably 2.
Daeril didn't say another word before walking off. The electronic door closed behind him, cloaking Peter in darkness, save for the glow and hum of Unit 66's tank. Now it was Peter's turn to stare at the tank. Mindlessly, he started to input commands into his datapad. There was a slight clicking noise in the pipes as the new drug started to flow into the Proxy. Her fingers began to twitch slightly, her eyes occasionally tightening. Her brain activity on the monitors began to spike before returning to standard readings. Peter sighed and silently prayed to any god who might hear him.
Will Unit 66 do us proud? Don't let me dusting off my resume distract you. You and I will be out of a job if you fail.
He sat down. Despite the work, despite the neurostims in his blood, he finally allowed himself to close his eyes and sleep. Codex Entry 1. We seen das. Proxies. An artificial synthesized human built as both disposable labor as well as performing high-risk specialized work. Biologically, they are identical to humans, though often given extensive cybernetic and genetic enhancement during their synthesis. Their neurology is also kept under careful maintenance, so that they strictly behave under specific conditions and objectives as provided by their wranglers, called Proxy overseers. This conditioning also prevents them from achieving any sort of self-consciousness or self-awareness. Thus, their use is considered humane by most institutions outside of a few proxy rights radical factions. Proxies are often used instead of androids and drones, despite the higher cost of production and maintenance. This is due to the Ganymede Accords, which strictly forbid the use of autonomous machinery after the Steel Crusade. Proxies, however, can still go rogue, though unlike autonomous machines, this is due to negligence on the proxy's owners rather than the more abstract and esoteric nature of artificial intelligence. Most cases of proxies gaining self-awareness is due to a phenomenon called epiphany, where unmaintained parts of a proxy's brain begin to form neural pathways, causing the brain to wake up and begin behaving like a normal human brain.